Last week we've talked about the biggest mistakes beginners make when learning Hunt Showdown. And if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend starting there. Because before learning how to improve, you need to question how you're learning right now. Otherwise, you will carry those exact habits into every question we're answering today. But once you remove those habits, another question becomes much more interesting. Why do some players seem to understand new games incredibly quickly? It looks like experience, mechanical skill, and sometimes even talent. But I think there's another reason we don't talk about enough. Good players aren't necessarily better at new games. They're often just better at learning them. And that's why I've decided to divide this video into 3 different chapters. Part 1 is about learning the game, covering chapters 1 and 2. If you just started Hunt and have no idea where to begin, start here. Part 2 is about learning from the game, covering chapters 3 and 4. This becomes useful once you've played the game for a few months and understand the basics. But maybe you've played for 3 to 6 months and improvement has been stalling. This is where part 3 comes into play. Because part 3 is about mastering the game, covering chapters 5 and 6. And after we talked about those 3 chapters, there's still one left where we talk about something that involves everyone. Because regardless of your experience, there's one mistake that undermines everything we will talk about in this video. So don't worry about applying everything immediately. Find the stage that describes you and start from there. And if you're completely new to Hunt, your first step is actually pretty simple. Before worrying about being good, you will need to find something that makes you want to keep playing. So where do you start when you're actually learning Hunt? Most beginners immediately start searching for the same thing. What's the best weapon? What's the strongest loadout? Or what should I play if I want to compete? But honestly, none of those questions should matter yet. Your first goal should be to find something that makes you enjoy playing the game. Try different rifles, shotguns, maybe melee weapons. Don't worry about finding the perfect loadout immediately. Just find something that wants you to keep playing another match. Because that's something I had to learn for myself. When I started playing Hunt Showdown, I hadn't really had any experience with shooters. My aim wasn't good, neither was my movement. But everyone around me talked about the same loadout. Always played Mosin and Dolch. Basically the usual suspects when you talk about competitive Hunt Showdown. So naturally, that's what I thought I had to play. And I got absolutely destroyed. Then I tried rifles, experimented with shotguns, and kept switching things around. Until eventually, I found an incredibly stupid looking weapon. The bomb lance. And for some reason, I absolutely loved that thing. And it wasn't because the bomb lance was some secret overpowered weapon. It was because every kill felt ridiculously satisfying. The strange projectile, the ridiculous drop range, and the risk behind every shot. And then finally hearing someone exploding after hitting him. That feeling was the reason why I have so many hours in this game. Because I always wanted to play one more match. And that's something that a lot of people underestimate when trying to improve. Improvement requires time. And time requires motivation. Of course, you can force yourself to play the theoretically best weapon. But if you hate playing every second of it, what's the point? The weapon that keeps you playing will teach you far more eventually, because you're actually willing to put in the hours to learn it. So forget tier lists for a moment. Forget what some 6-star player tells you what you should play. Explore the cheap weapons that Hunt Showdown is giving you and experiment with them. Maybe you do love the Mosin, or maybe you will fall in love with shotguns, or maybe you become a psychopath who runs around with melee weapons. It doesn't really matter yet. Find something that makes Hunt Showdown fun to play. Because once you found something that you enjoy, there's another question. Why do some weapons feel so much more natural to you than to others? And the answer might have nothing to do with the weapon itself. Because when you start Hunt, you're not actually starting from zero. Think of yourself like a character in an RPG game. You already have a skill tree before you actually started playing. Maybe your movement is strong, but you struggle under pressure. Or maybe your mechanics suck, but you're incredibly good at predicting people. Your previous experience already distributes those skill points for you. And understanding how those skill points have been distributed changes completely how you're learning Hunt Showdown. Take me when I first started playing. As I mentioned before, my aim was terrible and my movement wasn't particularly impressive either. But there was one thing that felt surprisingly natural to me. I was good at listening for information. I was good at predicting where people might move. And most importantly, positioning made natural sense to me. So imagine my teammates were fighting inside of a compound. Instead of sitting directly beside them, I would sometimes stay further out. I would listen for another teams approaching the fight. Then I would predict their route and move around them. While they focused completely on my teammates, I would attack from behind. And suddenly, my terrible aim mattered significantly less. I didn't need to win mechanically to win gunfights. I needed to create situations where my opponent couldn't react. And now my weapon choice from chapter 1 made complete sense. Shotguns worked because good positioning could end fights immediately. The crossbow could do the exact same thing. And eventually, the bomb lance fit that playstyle incredibly well. Those weapons weren't compensating for everything I did bad. They were allowing me to use what I was already good at. at. And your starting build might look completely different. Imagine someone coming into Showdown with thousands of hours of experience in Counter-Strike. Their aim might be absolutely ridiculously good, and maybe they're comfortable taking mechanically difficult fights. For that player, a rifle might be the perfect starting point. Someone coming from a tactical game might have a completely different starting build. That's why generic advice that tells beginners to play a specific way doesn't really work. We're all technically learning the same game, but we're not starting from the same place. So before trying to fix everything you're bad at, try to map out what you're good at. How good is your aim? How comfortable is your movement? How well can you read sound? What about positioning, anticipation, or working under pressure? You don't need perfect accurate answers now. You just need an honest approximation about your current character. Because your starting build isn't supposed to limit you. Having bad aim doesn't mean you have to avoid rifles forever. And struggling with movement doesn't mean that you should stop playing aggressive. This is simply your starting point. And once you know where you're starting at, learning becomes much simpler. Because instead of trying to learn every skill simultaneously, you can build a foundation around the things you already are good at. And from there, you can finally start talking about improvement. Because now the question isn't what you're already good at. It's how you identify what you can get better at next. So now you have something you enjoy playing. And you understand roughly where your strengths are. But simply playing more won't automatically make you better. Because experience only becomes useful once you actually learn from it. And that's something that fighting games taught me incredibly well. Let's say you play Tekken against a character you don't understand. They keep using the same attack and you keep losing to it. Your first reaction might be that this move is completely unfair. But complaining about that move doesn't solve the problem. So what do experienced fighting game players do instead? They go into training mode and recreate that exact same situation. They test different responses and try to understand their available options. Maybe you need to duck. Maybe you need to sidestep. Or maybe the situation started much earlier than you anticipated. And Showdown works surprisingly similar. Imagine walking around a corner and instantly getting killed by a shotgun. It's incredibly easy to look at that and say, of course another fucking camper. But that explanation doesn't teach you anything. Because that player probably didn't randomly choose that exact corner. Something made him believe that you will walk past it. So instead of asking why he was camping there, ask yourself, why did he know that I was coming? Maybe you triggered AI 30 seconds earlier. Maybe you stepped into glass while approaching the building. Or maybe your movement made your next play incredibly predictable. And sometimes, you genuinely don't know the answer. That's exactly when you should look at your gameplay again. Record your matches when you're actively trying to improve. And if you die in a moment and genuinely don't understand how, save the moment and watch the replay. But don't necessarily analyze it right away. Come back tomorrow when the frustration from the fight is gone. Now watch yourself like you're watching someone else's gameplay. Where did the situation actually start getting wrong? What information did you give your opponent? And knowing what you know now, would you have done something differently? Because your death isn't necessarily where you made the mistake. You might have lost it 30 seconds earlier. The important part is finding an explanation. Because getting angry at something you don't understand is incredibly easy. However, learning from it requires curiosity. But there is an obvious limitation when it comes to analyzing yourself. You are only capable of finding solutions that you are able to see. So sometimes, the fastest way to discover another solution is watching someone who has already found it. And this is where watching incredibly good players becomes extremely valuable. But probably not for the reason most people think. Let's say you're watching someone like Rahta play Hunt. You see his movement, his aim, and the ridiculous fights that he survives. And naturally, you might start imitating him. But there's one massive problem with that approach. You're not Rahta. You don't have his aim, you don't have his mechanics, you don't have his movement, and you don't have thousands of hours supporting that decision. In fact, some of the things experienced players do are incredibly bad for newer players. They can sometimes survive decisions that would immediately kill you because their other skills are good enough to compensate the risk. So don't watch great players trying to become them. Watch them because they can show you solutions to problems you haven't even thought about yet. And there is a really simple way to practice this. Imagine you're watching a full gameplay of a good player. He approaches the compound and suddenly hears another team nearby. Pause the video. What would you do right now? Would you hold your position? Would you push closer? Would you rotate around them? Or would you completely disengage? Make your own decision before seeing theirs. Then continue the video and maybe they do the exact same thing you thought about. Or maybe they do something completely different. And that's where the interesting part starts. Don't ask what did they do? Ask why did that work? What information did they have? What did they know about enemy's position? What did their current loadout allow them to do? And what happened earlier that influenced that decision? You're not trying to memorize the answer to one situation. You're trying to understand the principle behind the answer. Because that exact situation probably won't happen again. But the principle behind it absolutely will. But sometimes You will watch gameplay and have absolutely no idea. You understand what the player did, but you cannot figure out why it was the correct decision. And that's exactly why I built my channel completely differently. There are incredible Hunt Showdown creators out there who can show you amazing gameplay. But my goal was never to show you what I personally do. I want to understand why certain things work in the first place. Why does aggression sometimes create advantages? Why does playing safe sometimes make the situation worse? And why can two seemingly similar fights create two different decisions? These are the kind of questions my videos are built around. So if you're already watching someone and can't understand the principle behind him, check whether I've covered it already on this channel, because there is a good possibility I already have. And if I haven't, tell me in the comments. Because if there is a principle you're struggling to understand, chances are other players are struggling with the exact same thing. And that might be another thing we will break down in the next video. Because learning from good players isn't about copying them. It's about understanding enough of their thinking to become better yourself. And once you start doing that, you will notice something incredibly uncomfortable. Some of those answers will expose incredible weaknesses in your gameplay. And that's exactly where the next part of learning begins. So now you know how to analyze your own mistakes. And you know how to learn from other players who are better than you. Eventually, both will reveal the same thing. There are situations where you're simply not comfortable yet. And most players naturally try to avoid those situations. If you're uncomfortable with fighting inside of compounds, you stay outside. If fighting multiple players overwhelms you, you avoid taking those fights. And if pressure destroys your aim, you simply wait for better opportunities. That might help you survive more games, but it rarely makes you practice the things you're actually bad at. So once you identified your weaknesses, create situations that force you to train it. And Hunt Showdown has an incredible tool for that. Play solo. Not because playing solo automatically makes you a better player, but because nobody can compensate for your mistakes. If you make a terrible decision, there is no teammate fixing it for you. If you miss crucial information, there will be nobody calling it out for you. And when you die, the match is over. Your mistakes become immediately visible. But even here, you should choose what you're trying to practice, because solo versus duos and solo versus trios teach completely different things. Let's say your biggest problem is being nervous in fights. You see another player and instantly rush your first shot. Or you have a perfect opportunity, but you don't confirm the kill. In that case, I would recommend solo versus duos. Your initial engagement becomes incredibly important. If you stay patient and secure the first kill, you've created a 1 versus 1 situation. So solo versus duos can help you slow down when the first opportunity arrives. Wait for the clean shot and make the first advantage actually count. But maybe your initial engagement isn't the problem. Maybe everything falls apart when multiple people are pushing you. That's why I recommend solo versus trios. Because even after making the perfect first pick, you're still outnumbered. And suddenly, simply shooting better isn't good enough. You need to reposition before they collapse on you. You need to keep track where multiple players were last seen. You need to hear sound while being under constant pressure. And sometimes another team might join the fight. And then you have to understand which players are fighting each other. When should you disappear? When should you create another angle? And how can you pit two teams against each other? Those situations can feel incredibly overwhelming at first. And that's exactly why they're so valuable. You're deliberately putting yourself into situations where you're simply not good enough yet. Not because dying repeatedly makes you better, but because every attempt gives you a situation that you're able to recognize and learn from. And eventually, something that felt completely chaotic suddenly becomes familiar. And that's the goal of deliberately practicing your weaknesses. Don't just create harder matches. Create the kind of difficulty that trains something very specific. But eventually, individual fights stop being the hardest thing you have to learn. Because Hunt Showdown isn't really about collecting isolated fights. Every fight exists in a larger match. And this is where Hunt Showdown becomes significantly more complicated. Because making the right decision isn't really about what's good right now. It's also about what happened before it. Imagine you're approaching the boss compound, but while moving there, you suddenly hear a fight breaking out right next to you. What should you do now? Go to the boss or move towards the fight? And the annoyingly clear answer for this problem is it depends. Because those gunshots alone don't give you enough information. Think about everything you heard throughout the match. Maybe the map has been incredibly active. You've heard multiple fights and can roughly track where other teams are at. And maybe you've seen some bodies from other fights. And from everything you've already heard, this fight could probably be the last team. Now attacking them becomes much more attractive. You know where they are. And you have the opportunity to choose how to approach them. And the risk of another team approaching are very low. But now imagine a completely opposite match. You've heard absolutely nothing for the past 15 minutes. No distant gunshots, no obvious fights, nothing. And suddenly you hear one team shooting beside you. Going directly toward them now might become incredibly dangerous because you have no idea where everyone is. There could be another team between you and the other team that is fighting, or another team might hear the gunshots and approach you from behind. The gunshots are identical, but the correct decision might be completely different because the context surrounding them changed. And this is something a lot of players constantly struggle with recognizing. They focus completely on the fight directly in front of them. But information in Hunt Showdown doesn't disappear after 30 seconds. Every gunshot tells you something. Every triggered sound trap tells you something. And even longer periods of silence tell you something. And good players slowly build a picture around the entire match throughout every information they receive. Where did the teams probably spawn? Which directions were the gunshots coming from? How many different weapons have I heard? And which teams might realistically still be alive? You won't always be correct. That's not the point. The point is that you're making decisions based on the information you already have. And this connects directly back to analyzing better players. Sometimes you'll watch someone completely ignore a fight he could have taken. Or sometimes they completely rotate somewhere that makes no sense. The question isn't if you would have done the same thing. It's what information made that decision reasonable for them. Because developing game sense isn't really about memorizing situations. It's about connecting more information before you choose a decision. And the better you become at doing that, the less random Hunt Showdown feels. But there's one final problem that can destroy everything we've talked about in this video. You can understand everything we've talked about this far and still ruin it by trying to be someone you're not. Because there's one final thing that applies regardless of your current skill level. At some point, someone will tell you that you're playing Hunt Showdown wrong. Play a shotgun and someone will call you a noob. Play slow and someone will call you a camper. Use something unusual and someone will tell you that what you're doing is complete garbage. And sometimes people will simply insult you because they can. You cannot build your playstyle around avoiding those options. Because no matter how you play, someone will always complain about it. And most importantly, none of those people started where you started. Remember the skill tree we talked about in the beginning? Everyone enters Hunt Showdown with a completely different starting build. Different strengths, weaknesses and experiences. So why would the same learning process work for different peoples with different starting points? The bomb lance worked incredibly well for me. That does not mean that you should play the bomb lance. Maybe you immediately feel comfortable with the Mosin. Or maybe you only want to play shotguns. Or maybe running around with a melee weapon feels the most comfortable for you. If it works for you and makes you want to improve, that's enough, because good advice should give you options, not instructions. And that includes everything I've talked about in this video. These aren't rules you need to follow. They are tools you can experiment with. Keep what helps you and throw away everything that doesn't. The same thing happens when you're comparing yourself to other players. Maybe your friend has incredible aim. Maybe you watch Rata and can't understand how to play like him. Or maybe social media constantly shows you gameplay of players hitting shots you could not even imagine to hit. But you're comparing your entire experience against somebody else's highlight reel. You don't see every missed shot. You don't see every terrible match. And you definitely don't see the thousands of hours of experience that happened before it. So stop comparing your progress by how closely you resemble somebody else. You will never be better at being someone else better than they are. But nobody else can become exactly the player you can become. Learn from everyone, copy no one. Take advice from better players, question your own mistakes.